This is a response to Pyrrho's video on philosophy and psychology. Hi there, Pyrrho. Yeah, it's an interesting project, that. I'd like to do some thinking myself about that relationship between those disciplines, if that's what they are. Because there does seem to be quite a bit of work gone on recently about that relationship, or different understandings of what those terms are and how they might relate. So I suppose I'm thinking about Pat Churchland's stuff on neurophilosophy, where she's looking to brain science for explanations of philosophical concepts or relationships with philosophical concepts. Not exactly psychology, but brain science, close to it. And even to people like Ken Wilber, who I don't have an awful lot of time for, but you know, he talks variously about integral psychology and yeah, smooths that into discussions of philosophy and spirituality relatively seamlessly. This way, pups. Come on. You're coming at it as, in terms of embodied mind, which is more akin to my interests, really, I suppose. And I'm guessing you're talking about people like Lakoff and Johnson and yeah, that kind of school of thought. Rafael Nunez, Yves Sweetser. And particularly, I suppose, the point of contact that I would make with that would be, you know, Lakoff and Johnson, particularly Philosophy in the Flesh, which is that pretty seminal book on that relationship, where they basically, as I think, at least this is my understanding what they're doing, they basically analyse the history of Western philosophical thought in terms of the embodied metaphors that power it. Because the whole idea of the philosophy in the flesh thing, I know you know this, but just to sort of singing from the same maths book, is that you know, the whole philosophy in the flesh is that our minds are made up, our cognitive processes are made up of largely non-conscious metaphorical mappings from physical and perceptual and motor processes. So we understand abstract concepts in terms of concrete concepts, and that's revealed in our language and our gestures and our images, those kind of things. But that's the kind of poetics of mind stuff that Raymond Gibbs talks about as well. Yeah. So that's the direction into that I would come from. Just in terms of what you were saying, Pyrrho, and there's lots of things in there that I've only watched your video once. I will go back and look at it again, because there was some quite interesting bits in there that I would want to pick up individually, I think. But the bit that jumped out at me was the bit about truth and honesty. I don't know if I can really get to what I'm thinking about there. But I suppose it just relates to some stuff I've been thinking about recently in relation to propositional attitudes as opposed to cognitive attitudes, which for me might be one of those linkages between philosophy and psychology that can perhaps be articulated best through an embodied mind kind of model. Propositional attitude is the cognitive attitude. Well, you know, it's the mental attitude we have to a proposition. So if I say a proposition like Santa Claus is a fat man who brings you presents every Christmas, that's a proposition. Then I can have an attitude towards that proposition, which might be one of belief or disbelief or doubt or liking or disliking. These are all propositional attitudes I have. What's important is the propositional attitude I have doesn't rely on the truth or falsity of the proposition itself. It doesn't matter that there is no fat man who brings you presents every Christmas in a red suit. That's not important. I can still have that belief. I can still have the propositional attitude appropriate to that statement. I can still believe it. And it's still true to say, I believe a fat man in a red coat brings me presents every year. That would still be true. I would be being honest by making that propositional statement, even though the propositional statement itself is in all likelihood false. That's distinguished from cognitive attitudes. That's a propositional attitude. Distinguished from cognitive attitudes, which is something like no, which is where I think it possibly overlaps, because a lot of philosophy, the philosophy of knowledge, is really interesting in this regard, I think. Because if I say, I know there is a fat man that brings me presents every year in a red coat, then that statement would be incorrect, because in order for me to know something, the proposition that I know has to be true. Yeah, it only makes sense for me to say, it's only correct for me to say, I know there is a fat man called Santa Claus who brings me presents every year. That statement is only true if the proposition itself is true, if there really is a fat man called Santa who brings me presents. If it's not, then I'm, perhaps unwittingly, but nevertheless, yeah, I'm not being honest. I would be making an untrue statement to say that I know that. Yeah, so it kind of, for me, that kind of where it breaks, this honesty, truth, philosophy, psychology thing. Oh, there's an interesting area of confusion and overlap there. I don't know if I made any sense there, Pyrrho, at all. It's a bit early in the morning, really. Anyhow, yeah, I'm sure there's lots of roads into this philosophy, psychology, overlap, discussion, reiteration. But the one that, as I say, is jumping out from me, from what you were saying, is this thing to do with truth and honesty. And I guess I'm just offering, see if you can do anything with these propositional attitudes as opposed to cognitive attitudes thing. You might not, I'm not sure if I could really. Anyway, thanks very much.